Every poem he wrote was for her, but she never read a single one. His name was Leo, and for the past 365 days, he had been a fixture at the daily grind, a small coffee shop with mismatched chairs and the constant hum of the espresso machine. He wasn't there for the artisanal beans or the free Wi-Fi. He was there for Clara. Clara was the barista, the one with a galaxy of freckles across her nose and a laugh that could cut through the morning rush. She moved with a practiced grace, her hands a blur as she steamed milk and pulled shots of espresso. Leo would sit at his usual corner table, a black coffee cooling beside his worn leather-bound notebook. He'd watch her, and the words would just ... flow. He wrote about the way a stray crow would fall across her forehead as she leaned over to hand a customer their drink. He wrote about the concentration in her eyes as she perfected the foam art. On a latte heart, a swan, a simple leaf. He wrote about the sound of her voice, a melody that made the clatter of ceramic and the hiss of steam fade into the background. Each day, he'd fold the new poem into a neat square, write for the girl with the sunshine smile on the front, and slip it into the tip jar when she wasn't looking. He was a ghostwriter for his own heart, hoping the anonymous words would somehow reach her, that she'd feel the weight of his affection without knowing its source. He imagined her finding the note at the end of her shift, a small smile playing on her lips as she read his clumsy verses. It was a foolish, romantic notion, but it was all he had. The problem was, Leo was painfully shy. The idea of actually talking to her, of saying, "Hi, I'm Leo, and I think you're incredible," sent a jolt of pure panic through him. So he hid behind his words, his poetry a shield and a confession all at once. He convinced himself this was enough. One rainy Tuesday, the bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in, shaking water from his umbrella. He was tall, confident, and greeted Clara with an easy familiarity that made Leo's stomach clench. He leaned over the counter, and she laughed at that beautiful laugh. But this time, it wasn't for a customer, it was for him. Leo watched as the man said something that made her blush. He watched as they exchanged numbers. He watched as his fragile hope began to splinter. He didn't write a poem that day. The pages of his notebook remained stubbornly blank. The words were gone, replaced by a dull ache in his chest. For the next week, he still came to the coffee shop, but the notebook stayed closed in his bag. He'd just order his coffee, find his corner, and watch. He saw the tall man, whose name he learned was Mark, pick her up from her shift. He saw them share a coffee on her day off, sitting at a table near the window, their heads close together. Clara still smiled at him when he ordered, the same polite, professional smile she gave everyone. The usual, "Leo," she'd ask. She knew his name. She knew his order, but she didn't know his heart. She didn't know that for a year, he had poured every ounce of his admiration for her onto paper. The tip jar sat on the counter, filled with crumpled bills and loose change, but no folded squares of paper. Leo wondered if she'd even noticed their absence. Did she ever even read them? Ad, tu. No, the uncertainty was worse than the rejection he'd been so afraid of. So one afternoon, after the lunch rush had died down and the shop was quiet, he finally did it. He walked up to the counter, his heart hammering against his ribs. Clara was wiping down the espresso machine, humming softly to the indie music playing overhead. She looked up and gave him her usual warm, "Hey, Leah." "Hi, Clara," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. He cleared his throat. "I have a weird question." She paused, cloth in hand. "Okay, shoot." "The tip jar," he said, gesturing towards it. "Do you ever find little folded notes in there?" A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Notes? Like with song requests?" "No, like poems," he said, the word feeling foreign and ridiculous on his tongue. She thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Oh, you mean those little squares of paper?" "Yeah, sometimes. I always assumed they were just old receipts or someone's grocery list." She gave a little shrug. "To be honest, at the end of a long day, my boss and I just emptied the jar into the register drawer. We never really look at the bits of paper." Leo felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Never looked. Not a single one. 365 poems. 365 pieces of his heart. swept away with the loose change and discarded trash. They were never for her. They were just nothing. All that time, all that effort, all that fear and hope, it had all been for nothing. He had written a year-long love story that was never even opened. A strange sense of calm washed over him. It wasn't the gut-wrenching heartbreak he'd expected. It was ... liberating. He had spent a year hiding, waiting for a sign, for a bit of magic. But magic doesn't happen when you're invisible. He looked at Clara, really looked at her. Not as a muse or an idol, but as a person who deserved more than anonymous notes in a tip jar. A person who was living her own life, a life he had only been a spectator in. "Oh," he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Okay. That's good to know." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Wait, were they from you?" Leo paused at the door, his back to her. He took a deep breath. For the first time, he wasn't going to hide. "Yeah," he said, his voice clear and steady. "They were. Every day, for a year." He didn't wait for her response. He walked out of the daily grind, the bell chiming his exit, and didn't look back. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. As he walked down the street, he pulled the leather-bound notebook from his bag. He opened it to a fresh, blank page. He felt the familiar urge to write, but this time, the words weren't for her. They weren't for anyone but himself. He started with a simple title, The Coffee Shop Poet. And for the first time in a long time, he began to write his own story. He was finally ready to be the main character.